Welcome to The Explainer. Have you ever really thought about what happens from a legal standpoint after a simple accident, like a slip and fall? Well, today we are unlocking the world of tort law. It's the system that governs everything from an accident in a coffee shop all the way to protecting your personal reputation.
All right, let's paint a picture. It's a scenario that happens all the time. Someone slips on a freshly mopped floor in a cafe and breaks their wrist. Ouch. Pretty straightforward, right? Well, it might seem like just a clumsy moment, but what you're actually looking at is the front door to a huge, fundamental area of our legal system. It's a system that, as we're about to see, protects all of us, every single day, in ways you might not even realize. So, to really understand what's next for our injured customer, we have to first figure out what kind of wrong this actually is. Because, not all wrongs are treated the same in the eyes of the law.
Okay, so the official legal term for this kind of situation is a tort. Now, I know, it's a weird-sounding word, but it comes from the Latin word tortus, which means twisted or crooked. And honestly, that's a perfect way to think about it. A tort is a wrong that has twisted someone's life off its normal path by causing them some kind of harm.
And this is where it gets really interesting, because a tort is not a crime. You see, a crime is considered a wrong against society as a whole, and the goal there is punishment. But a tort, that's a private civil wrong committed against an individual. So the whole point isn't to punish the cafe owner with a fine or jail time, it's to compensate the injured person for their loss, to try and make them whole again. Okay, so how does our cafe customer with the broken wrist actually prove that the owner is legally on the hook for what happened? Well, it's not just a guessing game. The courts follow a very clear, very logical process to figure this out. The best way to think about it is like a legal recipe, and it has 4 essential ingredients you have to prove. And here they are, those 4 key ingredients. First, there has to be an act, or in this case, what we call an omission, which was the failure to put out a wet floor sign. Second, you have to prove causation, that the lack of a sign is what directly caused the fall. Third, you have to show fault. Here, that fault is called negligence. And finally, number 4, there has to be actual damage. In this case, the broken wrist. You've got to have all 4 for a successful claim. So let's zoom in on that third ingredient, fault. Because in cases like this, it almost always comes down to negligence. The law asks a simple question. Did the cafe owner act as a reasonable person would have? A reasonable person puts out a wet floor sign. And importantly, it's an objective test. It doesn't matter what the owner intended, it matters what they did compared to that reasonable standard. And believe me, the law can be incredibly strict about this. There's a famous case, Nettleship v. Weston, where the court ruled that even a learner driver has to meet the same standard of care as a reasonably competent, qualified driver. No excuses for being inexperienced. But then, sometimes, the law just throws the whole idea of fault right out the window. This is called strict liability. For certain very high-risk activities, like manufacturing products or keeping dangerous animals, the law says if you cause harm, you're automatically responsible. It doesn't matter how careful you were trying to be. Now, let's zoom back out, because tort law is about so much more than a slip and fall. It's better to think of it as this vast legal shield that protects you in all sorts of ways. I mean, just look at the range of things it covers. It protects your personal security, both physical and mental. It protects your property from things like trespass. It even protects intangible things, like your reputation from defamation, your finances from negligent advice, and even your right to privacy. It's huge. And what's really fascinating is that for some of these torts, like someone trespassing on your land, you don't even have to prove they caused any damage at all. The law says the simple act of violating your property right is, in and of itself, the wrong. They call it actionable per se. The act itself is enough. And this is a really big but, behind all of these legal principles and old Latin phrases, there are these powerful real-world forces that are shaping every single decision being made. So get ready for this, because this fact is pretty mind-blowing. An estimated 94% of all the compensation that gets paid out in tort cases doesn't actually come from the defendant's own pocket. Nope, it comes from insurance companies. And that single fact, that reality, just hangs over the entire system. Another one of these hidden forces is all about policy. You see, judges are often really worried about something called opening the floodgates. They're incredibly cautious about making a ruling that might suddenly unleash a massive torrent of thousands upon thousands of new lawsuits. They worry it could totally overwhelm the courts, not to mention the insurance system. So, okay, let's put all the pieces together. When you step back and look at this incredibly complex system, What is its ultimate purpose? I mean, why do we even have it?
Well, it really boils down to two main goals. The first, of course, is compensation. It's about shifting the financial burden of an injury from the victim over to the person at fault, or more likely their insurer. And the second big goal is deterrence. The idea is that the threat of having to pay all that money should discourage people and companies from acting in unsafe or harmful ways to begin with.
Now, we've all heard the stories in the media about a so-called compensation culture that's completely out of control, right? But here's the thing. The actual data tells a totally different story. Official research shows that the number of accident claims has actually stayed pretty stable for decades, and in some areas, it's even gone down. And all of this brings us to a final, really thought-provoking question. We started this whole journey talking about righting a wrong, but if 94% of tort law is basically just a complex mechanism for insurance companies to pay out claims, what does that really say about its role as a moral system? Is it truly about delivering justice for an individual, or has it evolved into something else? A highly complex, maybe even inefficient system for just spreading financial loss across all of society? Something to think about.